Hello and welcome to Spy Hard's podcast. I'm Agent Scott, and usually I would be joined by Cam the Provocateur, but due to scheduling he can't make it this week. So stepping in and stepping up is Mr. Jeff Quest. He previously joined us for Day of the Jackal back in the day from, of course, spyright.com. Jeff, how are you doing today?
I am great. I am happy to step in, fill in. I can't fill Cam's shoes, but I will do my very best.
They are very, very small shoes. I think you probably could fill them in. We need to come up with a spy name for you, by the way. Obviously, I'm Agent Scott, and he's Cam the Provocateur, so we need like a Jeff pun.
Well, my last name's Quest, so, it's got a little bit of a ring to it already. So.
Yeah, and Jeff Quest. There you go. Actually, that's a terrific name. That's actually like a sci-fi name right there. That sounds like an 80s sci-fi film, which I'm sure you've heard before. But we're here to talk about something slightly different this week. There's a new show on ITVX here in the UK. I'm sure it will be premiering in the States, or at least North America at some time in the foreseeable future. But it is an adaptation of the Ben McIntyre book, A Spy Among Friends. And basically it's a 6-part mini-series. And Jeff and I were invited to go to a press Q&A for the show. And we got to watch the first 2 episodes as part of a press screener. So what we'll do is we're going to talk about our thoughts on the first 2 episodes. We're going to keep it non-spoiler for everyone. But we did get the chance to speak to basically the showrunner, Mr. Alexander Carré, and the writer of the book that it was based on, Mr. Ben McIntyre, for about 40 minutes. So what we're going to do is we're going to throw to that first, and you can hear from the men themselves that made the show what made them want to tell this story. And so without further ado, let's throw to the interview. There you go. And joining me today to talk about their new show, A Spy Among Friends, we have firstly Mr. Ben McIntyre. Ben, say hello.
Hello. Hi, how are you?
And Mr. Alexander Carré. Hello, Alex.
Hi, how are you doing?
We're doing well. Thank you for joining us to talk about this show this week. Now, I've actually just watched the first 2 episodes yesterday. I'm quite excited to talk about it with you. I'm more adept at spy film than I am with spy TV, I have to say. So this is it's sort of a different way of telling stories. It's actually an interesting way of doing it. And also want to point out, Ben, a big fan of the Operation Mincemeat film that came out recently as well.
Oh, thank you. Yes, no, that was terrifically good fun. Very different sort of story, of course. I mean, but both rooted in deception.
Absolutely, and both had little Ian Fleming nods as well, which I quite like.
You need that.
It's the 60th anniversary of James Bond this week, so it feels apt to mention it as well. What I'll do is I'll try and split the questions as sort of you can both answer. But to start us off, I did want to throw a question at you, Ben, just about the actual book that you wrote that this story is based off on. What sort of interested you about telling the Kim Philby story?
I came to this story actually through John le Carré. David Cornwell, who was a friend of mine, and I remember going for a walk with him on Hampstead Heath many years ago, and I was between books, and I said to him, and he knew exactly what I was doing. I said, David, I don't know what to write next. And he said, the best story in espionage is about the relationship between Kim Philby and Nicholas Elliott. Now, David knew Nicholas Elliott because David was an agent both in MI5 and MI6, and he'd got to know Nicholas Elliott quite well. And he just very generously said it's a way of telling that story that is completely different from the traditional telling of it, which is, it's always been told through the prism of the Cold War as a simple, not necessarily simple, a complicated story of conflict between capitalism and communism, really, of which they are the actors. The story that I wrote, and I was so lucky to have access to all this new material, was about the relationship between these two men who had both grown up together, both had been in MI6 together, both had sort of fought, as it were, shoulder to shoulder during the war and after it, and both rose very rapidly within the ranks of MI6. But throughout that time, one of them was betraying the other. And it's just an extraordinarily intimate sort of treachery, because we're very familiar with the other sort of treachery. This is a different sort of emotional treachery. Plus, there is some fantastic spycraft involved in it as well, because Philby was the best liar this country's ever produced, I suspect. He was absolutely brilliant at it. I mean, it's very difficult to lie compound lies, and nobody was better at it to coin a phrase, nobody did it better.
A good week for that phrase, I would say. It's definitely a very personal story, and it's quite heartbreaking, the relationship between the two of them. And obviously, to see your friend do something like that can shake your foundation and your grasp of sort of the reality that you have. So it's definitely an interesting angle to come at the story from. And I think that's something I appreciated from watching the episodes yesterday, was dealing with the interpersonal relationship between the two leads. Alex, I want to throw this to you now. Before we get to maybe making the TV show, what interested you in the Philby story? And were you aware of the book, or had you read about Philby before in the past?
Yeah, well, I'd read the book probably about a couple of years before this came along. Before I was asked to consider adapting it, I had read it because I'm a fan of Ben's work. So I had read several of his books, actually. And when I was doing Homeland, this book was one of some interest to us on the writing staff, just because of the nature of the debrief in Beirut between a man who realizes he's been betrayed for 20-something years, dealing with his friend and at that point his greatest adversary. So I was aware of it, and it was that friendship and the aftermath of that friendship and the reflection that requires on behalf of the bereaved, for want of a better word, that led me to think that this would be good drama for television. And then concurrent with that, sort of self-reflection that Elliot has to go through, or at least looking at maybe his response, his culpability in Philby's success, the investigation coming at him sideways from the sister service, just seems like drama that you can't pass up if you're allowed to do it properly, and that is key to this show. And Damian and I were discussing this before. We believe we were allowed to tell the story the way we wanted to tell it by, Sony and ITV and Charter and now MGM Plus, which is so we feel like we told the story we wanted to tell in the way we wanted to tell it. And the other thing is that I took extraordinary liberties with Ben's amazing book, which was very nerve-wracking to begin with, but he's been very generous and supportive throughout the whole process.
I mean, the risk of mutual flattery. Actually, I felt you didn't. I mean, you did little violence done to the facts. The truth is, the emotional core of this story is real. I mean, it is. There's no doubt about it. It's there is one major fictional character, which is the investigator, but otherwise, this is really very true to the book. And I think it lends itself brilliantly to an episodic treatment because it's a complicated story in some ways. This is a friendship that unfurls over a very long period, and lots of different people are involved in it. There are other characters who affect the way these characters interrelate with each other, although it is the friendship is the central core. And it's also a subject, I don't know if you agree, Alex, but that we don't really talk about very much these days, and we certainly didn't talk about it in the sort of 50s and 60s, which is the nature of male platonic friendship. These were very intense relationships, forged in this case in the sort of hot crucible of war. And the idea that it could involve betrayal was simply unthinkable to one side, but second nature to the other. I think that's what makes this such a brilliant series, is that it's a story really about where personal friendship and loyalty end, and where politics and patriotism and professionalism begin. And that's a very shifting line. And with 6 episodes, Alex has really been able to unpack that question because it's a really complicated one.
Yeah.
Well, let's take us back, because that's actually one of the questions I had written down. You sort of led me in beautifully, was about the sort of mode of adaptation. Obviously, you went down the route of a television show, and I mentioned, Ben, recently, Operation Mincemeat was turned into a major motion picture. Why did you choose a TV show over a many different things. Stage, you could do it as a radio play, lots of outlets for the story. But what made you go for TV?
TV seemed to me to be the absolutely natural home of this, because it is a kind of detailed account. You need time to explore the relationship. It takes place over a considerable period of time, temporarily as well. So you need that space to be able to explore. And as a feature film, it would be an adventure story, and it would be, in a way, it would simplify something that I think you would, in a funny way, do the viewers a disservice by packing it into 90 minutes. Whereas you need to be able to unfold it over time, I think. And it's partly because it takes place also in lots of different places. We're going from Beirut to Moscow to London to Washington DC. So and I think viewers, well, I'm no expert on this. Alex would be much better than I am, but viewers have recently, over the last few years, I think, become used to being challenged and to being given a kind of a task in some ways. It's not just entertainment that they sounds like it's hard work. It's not, but it's a brilliantly made film. But you need to be alert, and I think viewers will respond brilliantly to that.
Yeah, I think that also television suits this. Because I think, certainly in the way that we've told the story, is you want to come to a realization. You want Nicholas Elliott to come to a realization, A, about the level of the betrayal, B, about the espionage defeats or victories, or however you want to look at them. But C, you want it to be a journey of, in the end, personal recognition of culpability as the problem to solve, and then how to solve that problem. And I don't think you can do that and also give the correct amount of attention to the trauma that and shame and regret that Philby experiences in Russia, having betrayed his friend, not so much his country. In other words, there's a guy, I chose to look at it as a guy who was cut off from friends in Russia, not necessarily somebody who betrayed England. And he'd lost friendship and friends. And so in a film, yes, you could do it, but I think it would be short shrift. You would give a lot of that stuff short shrift, and you would have to replace it with plot moves to move the thing. We have not done that. Hopefully we haven't done that. We've done that with psychological shifts and periods of reflection and personal pain, which we've been properly allowed to explore, I think.
Well, I suppose then to the TV show itself and the process of adapting a book for the screen. I note that, Alex, you have writing credits on all 6 episodes. Ben, you have a writing credit on the first one. What was the collaborative effort between the two of you to sort of turn the book into a TV show? What process did you go through?
So, well, we met, first of all, before I put any words to paper, or I couldn't even figure out how to do it. And I just we sat at lunch near Borough Market. Ben took me to a restaurant near the Times, and I sat there and basically bullshitted them for as long as I could, that I might make a decent job of this, not knowing how on earth I was going to do that. So that's how it began, and Ben has taken a huge leap of faith with me in my process. And then, when I wrote the script, he was the first person I sent it to. He gave me some thoughts and some notes and all the rest of it. And so that's how it's been. It's actually a little bit representative of how everybody on this show has behaved. Everybody has had input. Everybody has been empowered to have influence on the story. Actors, costume department, everybody. And Ben has been a large part of that. I'd say Ben and Damian are the two people who have helped me shape the script. I mean, Ben principally with his book, but beyond that, with making sure my split infinitives were brought to heel.
Going mad on this. I mean, it's such a different, from my perspective. Writing a book, I get to explain. I have the space to kind of offer explication for quite complicated sort of narratives. The alchemy, the magic, whereby you can turn that sort of story into an emotionally resonant 6-episode tale, it completely eludes me. I wouldn't have the first idea how to do that, because, and that's why I never make a screenwriter, is I'm constantly trying to explain everything all the time. Whereas Alex had brilliantly caught the voices of these people and also given space for the actors to tell the stories as they want to themselves, as to sort of inhabit these people in an extraordinary way, really. So I felt my job was really to occasionally say things like, they wouldn't have worn a hat like that, and then sort of back out of the room politely. But actually, I would have been dismayed, but I would also have been astonished if Alex hadn't been true. I knew he was going to be true to the spirit of the thing, because he was so interested in the way the story unfolds and in the particular aspect that I had taken, and which is very faithfully represented in this film. It is a film about the Cold War. It's a film about politics. It's a film about very high stakes. And it's a film about treachery on a fantastic scale. But I think, in a way, much more unconventionally and much more interestingly, and in a way, completely in a way that is, I think, unprecedented in television and film. This is looking at that story through a completely different perspective. It's looking at it from the way these two men behave and talk and are brought up, and the things they share, which is almost everything, and the thing that they don't share, which is one very big thing.
Yeah, I mean, just to jump in, I think Philby seems like he's become like a Rorschach test for folks all over. Like everybody looks and has their own views of England and the Cold War and everything through a lens of him, and can kind of bounce it off of him as a mirror. And so I was wondering, it seems like, obviously in the book and in the show, the friendship is so crucial, and the betrayal there. And so I just was wondering, how did that work as the lens for telling this Philby story?
Well, it actually served as the glue that informs every scene and binds the scenes together, actually, for me. And even when we were shooting it, when the actors had questions, or Nick Murphy, the director, had questions, my response was, well, always go back to friendship. What is this saying about their friendship? Not just Philby and Elliot. It happens it happens between Elliot and Lily, which is really about the beginning of the friendship, a different kind of friendship that Elliot hadn't seen coming because he'd been too besotted with his own kind. It was very much informed the scenes between Angleton and Philby and Elliot, but later on, I think you've only seen 2 episodes. Is that correct?
That's right.
There's some stuff. There's a scene or 2 with Angleton and Elliot, and yes, they're spy scenes. They are definitely spy scenes, espionage scenes, but they are also scenes about the complications of friendship and betrayal. So friendship informed every single beat of this thing for me.
Fascinating. I'd also just jump in and say, I don't think either Philby or Elliot would be remotely surprised that their story is being told through friendship, because friendship was extraordinarily important to both of them, as it was to a lot of men of that generation. It was almost the defining element. It was they were part of a tribe, they were part of a club. And I don't think, when Philby was accused finally and had to give his press conference in his mother's drawing room, he is asked about friendship, and it's the one moment in that original tape where you can see him squirm a little bit, because he says, friendship, well, that's very complicated, by which he actually means, I think, friendship is very important. It is the most important thing to him. In fact, I think even for Philby, who was an ideologue all his life from the age of 18, I think the friendship for him in the end, and it's brilliantly caught in this series, was paramount, which is why, I don't want to give it away for your listeners, but he to the end of his life, he was troubled by the nature of this friendship.
and also I would say, and Ben, correct me if I'm wrong, but friendship is a crucial part of espionage, crucial. And what's fascinating about the story, and what, again, another thing that drew me to the story, and I don't even know if I've done it justice, I hope I have, is the idea that is in the world of espionage, you have to sort of create a fake friendship that then has to be 100% real.
Mm.
And so I think that if Philby had died undetected, that their friendship would have been 100% real in terms of its effects on either man. I think that it was incredibly valuable, his friend. I mean, again, I'm imagining this, but it is something I gleaned from between the lines in Ben's book, that the friendship that Philby had with Elliot, from Philby's point of view, was 100% real and something that he mourned afterwards.
I think that's absolutely right. In fact, there's good evidence for that, in fact, because Philby would not accept that his betrayal had destroyed the friendship. He didn't accept it. I mean, to the end of his life, he still believed that the friendship was intact, which of course it couldn't possibly be. I mean, it was completely ruined, and Elliot never recovered from it. But I think that is absolutely right. Philby never recovered. Well, nor did Elliot, actually. No. I mean, they both of them, I think, were ruined by this experience. So there's also, I think, there's something that is brilliantly caught here, which is about clubs. That if you belong to this very select group, you are a member of one of the most exclusive clubs that there could possibly be. I mean, these people came from a world of sort of clubs, and much of the action takes place in clubs, quite rightly. But, if you've been to Cambridge, that's a pretty exclusive club. They've both been to Cambridge. If you then join MI6, that's an even more exclusive club. If you are the only KGB agent inside MI6, as Philby was, that's a club of one. So this is also, I think, a story brilliantly caught about privilege and membership of an elite and the language and codes that go with belonging to a particular kind of British tribe.
Of which I have to admit being a part of, I would think. And I think it was fun and informative and sort of necessary to examine my own upbringing and how I was raised. Listen, I went to private schools where you were taught to believe that you were the future ruling class. Well, how fucking daft is that?
I thought you were just admitting to being a KGB agent there.
No.
A bit late now, but you never know.
So it was worth examining that.
No, absolutely. I wanted to ask about, and we've had screenwriters on the show, we've had authors on the show over the years, and it's not often you have a oversight of this. But did you have any? Did you aid in the casting of this? Did you have people in mind when you were writing the scripts? I guess it's mostly for Alex's question. I know obviously Damian is a connection there, is an exec producer on it, but there's some wonderful performances from Edmondson. Nice to see him in something else. Anna Maxwell Martin is fantastic in both episodes that I've seen so far. Did you have any sort of insight into the casting?
Well, yeah, I mean, I cast it.
There you go.
So when it came up and I was asked if I would be interested in adapting the book, I called Damian straight away. I called Damian before I started writing.
Right.
I said, "Is this something you would want to do?" And I said, "No, it's not Philby. I want you to be Nicholas Elliot. I want the story told from his point of view, largely speaking. That is the journey that is the most interesting in this to me." And so he said yes, and then we went and he's been involved in the casting as much as me.
Mm-hmm.
Then we brought Nick Murphy on to direct. He's been involved in the casting. He had a personal and professional relationship with Guy Pearce, which is so that happened. Anna Maxwell Martin, you can't really argue. That's a racehorse. That's a Ferrari of an actress. I mean, she is unbelievable. Edmondson, again, just extraordinary. I hope you'll watch the rest of the show. It's quite a mesmerizing performance. So I'll say it again. We made the show we wanted to make, including the casting.
Well, I was just going to say, jumping back to the betrayal, the thing that it struck me that it hasn't been touched on yet, but I'm maybe later on, is like the betrayal was actually even worse for Elliot than we see here, because he was the one that kind of brought Philby back in after he was, had to go and was accused of being a spy. He gave him his work in Beirut, right? And so I guess I'm just curious. We see him struggle with this, and how hard was that to put on the screen, as far as what must be, because of just my Americanness, the kind of uptightness of the British people, to keep that inside. How hard was it to write that for the screen?
Well, that's what makes it dramatic. Is that against the restraints of your stereotyping of British people. No, against the restraints of sort of the stiff upper lip, we are able, in a television show, and I think it speaks to the previous question about TV versus movies, in a slow burn, to get under the skin of these people. I mean, listen, in episode 1, we have a scene which I would defy anybody to say is not emotional, when Elliot weeps watching his imagination of Philby singing "Are You Lonesome Tonight" on the stage. So we get there, but we also get to the plot point you're talking about, which is the defending of or the aiding and abetting of Philby and the claim to escape, and the subsequent examination of Philby in the 50s. And Elliot's complicity in his defence, well, not just complicity, his involvement in his defence. We get to all of that, and because of the structure of this thing, we are allowed to dramatise the character looking back at what is so clearly now a glaring error, if not sin.
Well, and it really. I just had to say it has a feel of the Tinker Tailor, the look of the show. I have to imagine that was an influence. Even Sherlock Holmes, those 70s Sherlock Holmes, that kind of slow burn, it really felt a lot like that to me.
Well, of course, Bill Hayden in the Smiley stories is based on Philby. That comes from it. I think to understand the sheer level of shock that Elliot felt in reality and feels in this film, and the fury and the hurt, you can't overestimate how that combination of British reserve combined with the perfect camouflage of class and accent and upbringing and education, just how invisible Philby's betrayal was to his contemporaries. I mean, Elliot was not alone. Everyone fell for it, but Elliot, because he knew him better than anyone else, the sheer scale, the sheer sort of level of that internal emotional destruction for him is brilliantly unveiled in this story over time, and it's cumulative, and by the end you're left rocking by it, and rightly, because he was too. Although he, in later life, he always tried to sort of cover it up. The truth was, it was the central defining friendship of his life. And one other little point on that, which again I think the series captures brilliantly, in order to be betrayed, they say this, this is the sort of truism about adultery, isn't it? But in order to be cuckolded, you have to be slightly complicit in it. That it is, those things don't come out of nowhere. And there is some level in which Elliot sort of in his heart knew, but didn't dare see it, didn't want to see what he didn't want to see. And that is true of betrayals generally. Often they work because the deceptee, if there is such a word, the recipient of the deception simply doesn't want to see what they are seeing and emotionally feeling. And so that's again what a series can do, which a film would struggle to do, I think. Because that slow dawning realization you have that Elliot is fighting the truth. as it dawns on him. He doesn't want to see it because it's too damn painful.
Yeah, I mean, I think as in where as it with bravery, there is no bravery without fear. I think in terms of a friendship, there is no loyalty without doubt. So if you ignore the doubt in friendship, and we're getting really into the weeds in terms of examining friendship as a theme, but if you ignore the doubt, you cross over into blind loyalty, which I would say is a choice.
I think that's absolutely
and a dangerous one.
Well, spinning off from the point, actually, because we're talking about the slow burn, and I think one of the things the show does really well in the episodes I've seen is because we hear about people making these 10-hour movies on TV shows. And I think one thing this does beautifully is each episode feels like it has a beginning, middle, and end, and it actually culminates in the end of a story. It moves on to the next one in the next episode, but there is obviously the overarching story throughout. So I wanted to firstly just commend you on having that, because it's missing from a lot of modern television. But bouncing off of that, obviously adapting a book, and that's obviously coming from a real life story. I suppose firstly to Alex, what was the hardest moment from the story to adapt to a TV show?
The hardest moment? I don't think that the hardest. I don't think that there was any moment that was particularly hard. I mean, it was all hard. It's not easy. My feeling is that the hardest thing to portray was this idea of a friendship that has ended in a betrayal being so clearly, for want of a better word, fake, but also 100% real. And that's a very difficult thing. And that's not me inventing. This is in the book. All this stuff is in the book. All this great character work. It's all there. It's a matter of how do you distill that into something that not intellectual or particularly literary, but something visceral that an actor can get his hands on or her hands on. So that constantly was the hardest thing, but it was also it was. Thank God it was, because it informed everything. Does that make sense? God, I hope I don't hear this.
It actually did make sense to me. That's fine. Well, I suppose if I bounce that question over to Ben, obviously when you got involved and you heard they were adapting the story and you were working together and collaborating on scripting it and getting it made, was there a moment you thought from the story that this would be interesting to see in live action that you'd like to see on TV?
Yes, I mean, I think one of the trickiest balancing acts and which Alex has done brilliantly, is to balance the sort of very intimacy of their relationship with the hugeness of the stakes, because that's quite a hard thing to do simultaneously, because lots of lives were affected by this story. Lots of lives were ended by this story. There is a murderous aspect of this story, a very sinister backstory which is lurking throughout. People died because of this friendship. People died because of this betrayed friendship in very considerable numbers,
which we get to, but fairly graphically.
And it's brilliantly done. But that was one of the moments when I thought that's going to be hard to portray that. But it does work. It works. And the other thing is that, again, which I think is a tricky thing to do with spy stories, Le Carré was brilliant at it, is to convey the fact that these stories damage everybody. In the end, that everybody is chewed up by them. No, secrets are toxic. Spying is addictive. If you live that kind of life, if you choose to live that kind of life, you are appearing to be one thing on the outside and something else on the inside. And that is psychologically extremely damaging. And in a way, again, we don't want to get into the psychological weeds here, but this is a story about what happens if you are not true, if you are not true to yourself or true to what you appear to be, and what the effect of that is, not just on your closest friendship, but on everybody around you. Nobody comes out of this story unscathed.
We interrupt this program to bring you a special report.
Calling all agents. Independent podcasting, much like the spy game, requires considerable resources, whether it's research, equipment, hosting, or of course constructing a top secret volcano lair. We're putting out the call for your support.
That's right. As you may know, we've activated the Spy Hearts Patreon, home of our ever-growing lineup of Agents in the Field episodes where we decode non-spy films from your favorite spy actors, and full film commentaries with more intel than a Basil exposition briefing.
Cam, what have we got in our crosshairs this month?
The Enforcer and Muscle Beach Party episodes are live, and tune in December. It's going to be plenty of festive fun as we celebrate the holidays Spy Hard style.
And if that sounds delicious, then become a true Spy Hard today and join the circus at patreon.com/spyhards. But before this message self-destructs, Cam, resume the spy jinx.
One of the things I really appreciated about the way the story is told is that you figured out how to... both Elliot and Philby are now under scrutiny, right? Because the Russians don't trust his motives, and MI5 doesn't trust Elliot's motives. And the way that dueling story is told really moves it forward in a really interesting way that I hadn't really thought about. And how did you come up with that as a way to kind of tell the story and use that? Was that early on, or was that something that later came on as you were working on it?
No, it was early on because I was, so reading the book, I looked at it thinking, well, how do I adapt this? What I don't want to do, because the book is so good, is just regurgitate it. So I wanted to use the book as a sort of launching off point as well, so that I could imagine some things. And I couldn't figure out what the best way in was until I understood that this is a thing about class and clubbiness, as Ben has spoken about. And so dramatically, the most interesting thing to do is throw a grenade in there in the form of a working class woman, which also at the time, it was a light bulb moment for me, because then I said to myself, oh, hopefully you're going to look quite clever, because this also makes the story modern and fresh. And as soon as I came up with her, and I realized, oh, she has to go at Elliot. Of course he had to have been investigated if he came back from Beirut without Philby. Of course he had to have been. And as soon as I came up with her, that for me felt like dramatic gold. And then the day Anna Maxwell Martin stepped on set and did the scene where she goes which you've just seen in the first episode, where she goes, oh, do you think there's somebody who might be able to do something about that door? I knew, okay, this is going to work. And actually that character, sorry, I'm digressing now a bit, but that character, I was inspired by the performance of Fiona Hill, if you remember, in the congressional hearings against building up to the impeachment of Trump. Do you remember? And she was going on about all of the interference in Ukraine and all the rest of it. That she's a British-born American intelligence official from Durham. And I was like, oh, okay, that's what we need.
Now, we've only seen the first two episodes, and we'll be putting this out when the first episode drops so people can watch it, and we won't be spoiling things. But what I want to ask you is, what can viewers expect from the show, from the rest of the series? What can they look forward to from the show?
They could look forward to quite a lot of spycraft in Moscow, because Philby is not just he hasn't just rolled over, and they can look to quite a lot of spycraft in London, because Elliot is not going to roll over. Elliot needs to come out of this smelling somewhat of roses if he could possibly do it, or at least he needs to learn something and evolve out of posh clubland. So there's that, and just huge emotional stakes, I think, for both men in the 1963 continuum, but also in the, not the nostalgia, but in the grief of a friendship betrayed.
I'd say that be completely immersed in two different historical periods, actually. I mean, what Nick and Alex have done is to recreate that Bakelite brown Windsor suit world of the mid 60s in a way that is, I mean, it's the best, I think, representation of that since Smiley's People. It hurls you in, and it completely absorbs you in it. And Nick said from the beginning that he wanted the world of London and the world of Beirut and to be taking place in the background at all times. And you really do feel you're in a kind of sweaty fish and chip shop in 1964 or 63. And that's, so that this is a brilliant period piece. Most I think most TV series tend to skimp on that sort of thing. You know, they'll tell you where you are and give you a year and then just film the damn thing. This is extraordinarily atmospheric.
Also, I think it's quite funny.
Yes. They were alive to the absurdity of what they were doing.
Yeah.
I mean, all spying is faintly ridiculous. Well, I like writing about it, but they are aware of the comedy of what is going on and the humour that is one of the linchpins of their own relationship.
Yeah.
They spend a lot of time laughing with and at each other.
Yeah.
And it's genuine on Philby's part. I mean, he's not faking that.
No.
Which is what makes that friendship so fascinating. As Alex says, it's both fake and completely hollow and totally genuine.
I've got one final question, but Jeff, do you have a quick question for the end as well?
How fun was it to work in some of the stranger than fiction type of things? You know, there's some nods to Bond there, which is real, which is just kind of crazy.
Oh, that was a laugh. That scene. That was a scene. That was one of the first scenes when we were going through the budget. That people were going, we're not going to be able to do that. I mean, I wrote it to exist in the RAC Club, which is this incredibly sort of ornate place off of Piccadilly off of Lower Regent Street, and everyone was going, no, we can't do that unless there's a way to do it in the YMCA and somewhere else. We did it, and it was just fun. That was fun. There are some fun little sort of segues that we try to organically incorporate in the storytelling.
Ian Fleming would have been delighted, by the way, to be incorporated into this. A man not entirely immune to his own ego. I mean, I would love the fact that he's been brought in.
But that guy who played that little scene, it's just a tiny little nod to Ian Fleming. But that was such fun to do, and that guy really nailed it.
And it's a true story.
Yeah,
it's absolutely true, that story. I'm not going to give it away for the listeners, but when they do see that bit with Ian Fleming by the swimming pool, bear in mind this actually happened.
Again, there's just lots of little nuggets and fun to be had along the way.
Well, I'll take us out with a question that we've asked on this show from everyone, from John Glenn to Nicholas Meyer, directors, writers all around. And I'll put it to both of you. Let's go with Ben first. What is your favourite spy movie of all time?
I think it probably has to be Tinker Tailor. I mean, I think that
the movie or the TV show?
The movie. I just think it absolutely nails the combination of arrogance and incompetence that characterized that organization at that period, which Alex has done again here. But that's my all-time favorite.
Yeah, I think mine is also a Le Carré one, but it's because of a performance and how the performance captured the nature of espionage, and that's Philip Seymour Hoffman's performance in A Most Wanted Man. I think that is just. I go back to that. I don't just go back to that when I'm writing, anything to do with spies or espionage. I go back to that in terms of wanting to achieve that kind of excellence in collaboration with an actor, that to me, that's mind blowing.
I mean, both excellent choices for films. One of those we haven't actually had on the show at all before. We haven't had mentioned, so that's actually refreshing to hear. But I just want to say, Ben, Alexander, thank you both for taking the time to speak to us today. We really enjoyed the first 2 episodes that we saw. We'll be checking out the rest of the series, and we recommend everyone else does too. We look forward to the rest of A Spy Among Friends. Gentlemen, thank you for your time.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thanks.
Bye-bye.
Well, there you go, folks. That was our chat with Mr. Ben McIntyre and Mr. Alexander Carré. I want to thank them both for taking the time to speak to us, and I want to thank both ITV and Organic for organising the chat. But the question goes to you, Jeff. What did you think about that chat?
It was really interesting. I think watching these episodes and then getting to hear kind of how they decided to focus the story and bring it to life on TV was really fascinating to see the thinking that had to go into that, to take a story that the book, it reads like a novel, but it is really pretty tricky to try and put that on the screen, I would say. So I think that was interesting to see what their choices were there.
Yeah, I mean, it's for those listening won't be particularly surprised by this. I haven't read the book because I don't read many books. You can probably tell from the way I talk. I'm not that well educated. But Jeff Quest, he runs spywrite.com. It's spy books of their game. So, of course, I tapped up Jeff for this discussion. So, I think what we'll do is we'll sort of break down our thoughts on the first 2 episodes, keep it non-spoiler, and maybe just draw some distinctions and similarities between the book and the show.
That works for me.
Perfect. Well, maybe let's sort of touch on the point you just mentioned about the different forms of storytelling. The book itself, you say, just reads more like a book, like a narrative story, whereas the TV shows feels a bit more sort of disconnected with different stories running concurrently at the same time. Does the book have the same feel as that?
Well, there is a certain amount of jumping around in the book, but I'd say the TV series takes it to a whole nother level and trying to kind of make this knotty narrative work and stretch it for 6 episodes. So, it's the same but different.
Sure. And I think, for people like me, I think it makes it slightly more accessible as well. Just sort of breaking the story down this way. I mean, as I say, I haven't read the book, but this is the sort of storytelling that works for me, and I said that to Alex in the chat. But as for the episodes, as you are the expert on the book, I'll start with you, Jeff. What did you think of episodes 1 and 2 of A Spy Among Friends?
I really, really enjoyed them, but I also have as I say in the interview, it really does bring to mind the miniseries of Tinker Tailor Soldier Spy, or like those 70s Sherlock Holmes TV show. It's got a very it takes its time and enjoys to let things kind of play out and have the viewer kind of play a little bit of a catch up, and not necessarily have to know everything that's going on right as it's happening. And it takes the viewer as smart enough to figure it out, which I appreciate. Anytime somebody thinks that is willing to say, okay, my audience is going to be smart enough to get this, I appreciate that.
Yeah, there's there's the slight amount of hand holding, I would say, but I think there's always going to need to be some in any sort of storytelling, really. You need to sort of give some information to your viewer or your reader or your listener to help them know what's going on. And I draw a similarity between this and the second Harry Palmer movie of Funeral in Berlin. Now, that doesn't suffer fools particularly, but it gives you the information you need to get to the ending. But that's it. It doesn't give you anything more. It really isn't sort of really holding your hand. And I quite like that about this show. It does force the viewer to really pay attention, which for some people who want to come to TV just to watch it for just the sake of watching television, maybe that's not for them. But I don't think they would be watching a spy dramatization anyway.
Yeah. And I mean, you can't go wrong with the leads. I mean, I think that's their ace card. Having Guy Pearce is an amazing Philby. I thought he was wonderful. And Damian Lewis is really knocking it out of the park as well in the role of Nicholas Elliott. I was really impressed with both of them.
As someone who I would say is more educated on the subject of Kim Philby, this is sort of my first brushings with the real life person. myself, because I tend to stick to spy movies, and we haven't had an adaptation of that character yet on the show. What did you think of the characterizations? And were they actors that you would have thought of in those roles if you were casting it yourself?
Sort of. I mean, the interesting thing with Philby is he had a stutter, and you don't see that in this, which I can understand why they just kind of move past that, because that would be something that maybe people wouldn't be interested in seeing on screen slightly. For 6 hours. Yes. But, Guy Pearce, he doesn't exactly look like Philby. There's some interesting things where you can actually see some real life of Philby. You can search it out on YouTube. He doesn't quite look like him, but he doesn't quite not look like him either. And so, for me, I don't need, the prosthetics or all of that. I think if the actor is good enough, they can make it work. And so I think Pearce does a really good job of that. And he also does a very good job of letting you understand why people liked this guy, because he was so good at tricking everybody. He did trick everybody for years and years and years. And I would want to hang out with Guy Pearce's Philby if I met him on the street. He seems like a kind of guy you'd want to hang out with.
Well, the scene that really stood out to me in the first 2 episodes is there's the first night of the Blitz. Yeah. And both Philby and I'm forgetting the other chap's name now.
Nicholas Elliott,
thank you. Are at like a gentleman's club, and it gets hit by a bomb, and Philby is nothing but calm. Comes over and treats the wound and gets him a drink. That's such a gentlemanly thing to do. You're instantly swept up in this sort of nice guy routine, which it turns out to be somewhat of a routine, at least from what I'm seeing so far, because he's a defector after all. As for me, you'll know, listeners, Jeff, you know too, my background is in spy films, and generally fluffy films at that. When it comes to the more hard-edged spy stories, I don't balk at them necessarily, but I wouldn't say they're my cup of tea. I was genuinely swept up in the story, which I think was the key element here. And I think that's a lot to do with the actors chosen. And I also think a lot to do with the casting of Anna Maxwell Martin, who for me I found to be the access point, because she is, much like me, working class, doesn't understand this sophisticated lifestyle of getting bombed and then drinking immediately afterwards. I was able to understand that through her and her sort of disdain for it.
Yeah.
And so I thought that was wonderful. I thought that was a wonderful choice. And so... yeah, I definitely have enjoyed what I've seen so far. I don't know what's going to happen. You do, obviously, from reading the book. Are there big revelations coming up in the other episodes?
I don't know. They're kind of leading towards some sort of big revelation that I don't know is maybe there. So I'm curious how they play it out, given the way they've kind of set things up, to remain in the spoiler-free zone here and be a little bit of vague. But I would say, for me, obviously I kind of related more to the Philby Elliott story, being that upper crust kind of guy, I clubby, that was my interest in the story versus the working class side of things.
Well, you turned up in a top hat and monocle for this recording, so it completely makes sense.
I'm recording it from my club. They have a whole podcasting suite, so.
I believe your drink is here, by the way. Jean is at the door. Turning it over to you, Jeff, what's a particular moment in the first 2 episodes that really stood out to you?
You mentioned that the scene in the club. I think that was really great. I think for me, the scenes that stood out to me were the interrogation scenes where we see Elliot kind of going up against the MI5 interrogator, and also Philby going up against his kind of Russian handler. I thought those were where you see them both in very similar situations, but on the total different side of the coin. And I thought that really did some heavy lifting for making me interested in this story. There's a certain scene where we see Elliot in some distress while he's in that interrogation, and he has to kind of break away. And I thought that was really well done as well.
Yeah, the interrogation scenes were definitely a good way of introducing the characters and the stakes between the two of them. One thing that actually jumped out to me because we didn't get much of a chance to discuss the show off air before we started recording. But it's a question you took to the gents when we spoke to them earlier. Is that an invention for the screen? Is that something that's not done in the book?
Yeah. There's discussion about who they believe, whether MI5 or whether, the KGB believed both of them, but definitely the characters that we see there were inventions.
Oh, as in the sort of the MI5, the KGB people that were interrogating them are complete inventions for the show. I see.
Yeah. I believe so. Yeah, I don't think that the one lady is definitely not somebody that I remember appearing in the book as a real character.
So in the book, obviously you're getting the same story. Is that just told through their experiences then, or are they sort of looking back on what happened, or how is that told?
Yeah, I mean it's told kind of in your typical nonfiction way. It kind of starts at telling us about where these folks came from and then leading through the events that happened. So you definitely get more of their backstory as far as, at least for what we've seen so far, of, their history. That Philby's, family life was really kind of odd and weird, and you don't really get that in this, at least so far. So, there's more of that kind of discussion as well as Nicholas Elliott's background and how he ended up in MI6.
One thing I picked up on just from the show so far, which may not have been intentional, I didn't get a chance to take it to the gents when we spoke to them earlier today, was although they did speak a lot about sort of examining male relationships as like friendships, platonic relationships, and there's something that really doesn't get spoken about as much as it should these days, and that's something I'm a big sort of proponent of. I think men should be more open with each other about their feelings. I think the show does a lot of that. Giving them a chance to talk about their relationship together. I was also picking up on some like romantic undertones, but I don't know whether that's just sort of the leads playing it really well. Now, I don't know where this story goes. You do. I don't imagine there is any of that, but maybe that's just the power of their acting. But is their relationship supposed to be somewhat shrouded in secrecy?
I don't think so. I mean, there's always been this kind of, because with Cambridge 5, right, there was some, there were some relations there that were romantic, right, there. Sure. And so although it's been said about Philby, I don't think it's ever been proven or really believed, I don't think, for the most part for folks. So, I think there's just this weird thing with that kind of era and the folks that grew up in those private schools and the clubs, and there was just this weird relationship. It was like it's looking back on it now, I think it's really hard for people to understand that whole way of life. At least for me, not having any, I can barely keep track of public and private schools in the UK and what the difference is. But I think that going back even further, you look at these guys were growing up in the early 20th century there, and that's just a whole different time from where we are now.
Yeah, well, the expectation of males is very different back then. That's definitely changed over the years, and for the better, I would say. But it goes to maybe this sort of where I'm getting the sort of idea of romanticism between the two of them. Maybe it just comes down from the weird power dynamic they seem to have.
Yeah.
Which is not, I don't think was very evident to Damian Lewis's character, but I think to Guy Pearce's character, he knew obviously he was playing both sides, and so to then lose that and to it's almost as if your spouse is cheating on you in a sense. Like you've been done over by someone you trusted deeply. Now that can be a romantic thing, but that can be in a platonic relationship too. Your friends can really do your legs in. You trust people with your life or your stories, and they sell them, and that sort of thing. So I can understand where that sort of pain and sorrow comes from. Although holds it well. Damian Lewis so far in 2 episodes is not giving anything really. He's really holding his cards close to his chest, which again I think leads back to what you're saying about this sort of upper class, all boys, going to private school, that sort of thing. It's all bred into that. Is there something in the first 2 episodes that didn't quite work for you, especially knowing the source material as well?
I think some of the things that were more difficult for me was it did jump around quite a bit, and I think keeping track of all of that, you really do, like we said, have to pay attention and be kind of. And I don't know if it made more sense knowing some of the backstory, and so that would be my curious question to you: was it harder to follow not having any of that backstory, or not? To flip it around back on you, I guess.
No, I appreciate the question. I would say it was tougher because I don't know Kim Philby.
Yeah.
Like they're speaking in tongues at times about what he's done.
Yeah.
And I'm like, I don't know what he's done. You're not telling me. Which I guess is kind of like a conceit that they're trying to shroud it in secrecy for the viewer, assuming the viewer doesn't know anything. But it is, and it was going to be something I mentioned, the things I didn't like, is the fact that much as you can sort of obfuscate some of the facts, you should kind of know what he's done. Now, you know he's defected, but what secrets did he sell? What are the consequences of his actions? Now, we did find out that in the upcoming episodes, you will see more of those consequences, and I assume they're in there in the book too. But early goings, it was I sat there kind of going, I don't know who Kim Philby is. I don't know what he's done. So for me, he's just this lonely-looking guy on a boat in a port in Russia somewhere.
Yeah. I think for folks who are immersed in these stories and, love their Le Carré, I think this is going to be like catnip to those folks. For the wider audience, I'm not sure how many are going to come along for the ride. I guess that would be my question. It's made for a certain audience, and I don't know the crossover appeal of that, I guess, it would be my concern.
Well, I imagine a lot of listeners checking this out will be interested about the show, especially a lot of people in North America as well who might not get it straight away.
Yeah.
Obviously, it's ITV here in the UK, but I can assume it will get international distribution, much like the ITV adaptation of the Ipcris file eventually did.
Yeah.
And I wasn't the biggest fan of the Ipcris file TV version. I also had the same. I watched the first few episodes as a press screening and that sort of thing. But that went down the more fluffy route, I found. Like it sort of jazzed up everything, especially from watching the original movie. Although I haven't read the book either, it's not what I do. How did you? Because obviously you mentioned this is definitely for that particular audience, and I would say there's going to be a lot of listeners from Spybrary who you work with through your readers on spywrite.com that will be interested in this. I think because they are very much the devout readers of books, spy books specifically. But ITV needs to appeal to a mass audience. It's one of the 5 terrestrial channels here in the United Kingdom that are free, basically. Public access television in a sense, but like anyone can watch it. And so they need to make it for everyone. And that is something I question where they're going with this. Maybe it kicks up a gear in the next few episodes and you get some explosions. Not that you necessarily need that, but it's definitely holding people at a distance, and unless you know your scripture in this world, I don't know if you will be really enjoying it by episode 2.
Yeah, I think for me, I really enjoy this type of television, and so I would give it a rave. But it's also, it's not gonna be everybody's cup of tea, as you said. And
I appreciate you using the British vernacular there. Thank you.
Well, and there's a lot of tea in this show too. They're drinking tea all the time. They're also doing a lot of drinking. Man, they drink a lot. But
I've been drinking vodka out this flask the whole time.
A pink, what do you call it? A pink lady or pink gin or something? He's asked for at one point. Yes.
Yeah, pink gin.
So I agree. I think it's gonna be it's like kind of it feels like a prestige show, right? Like
Sure.
Over here, it's something we'd see on HBO or, a PBS Masterpiece Theater is where I could see this being placed at some point. One of those very, for an audience that's willing to sit down and give it a lead and let it go and see where it takes them. So, but yeah, is it going to appeal to the Fast and the Furious audience? Probably not.
I can't believe I just got lumped in with the Fast and Furious fans, but I'll take it.
Hey, I like those movies too.
That is about right for me, to be fair. That is about right. Well, a couple of questions I think to discuss before we wrap up, Jeff. One is, obviously, we've seen the first 2 episodes. Hopefully, I'll be dropping this around the time that the first episode lands. We haven't really given any spoilers away, so I'm glad about that. But what are you, having known the book and known Ben McIntyre's work, what are you hoping to see in the subsequent 4 episodes? Not so much in terms of plot points, but like moments and sort of how the show takes us.
I would like to see, just because their relationship was so odd, Philby's father. I hope they do even, and I don't know that we'll get it because it seems like they're really trying to keep it within this narrow window of time of, here, but I would love to see some flashbacks to that because his dad was a wacky dude. And I'd love to see that explored a little bit more and what made Philby who he is. And I think if they can dive a little bit more into that, because he is such a cipher in certain ways, I'd love to see some more of that.
Yeah, fair. I mean, I would just like to see a little more sort of context, really. Who is Kim Philby? What is the result of his actions? And I know they're probably just spoon feeding us information until we get to that revelation, but it's slightly frustrating being behind.
Yeah,
like I feel like I don't know something I should know, and at the time of recording, we've done 110 or so spy films. I've interviewed countless people who've made spy films. I don't know if I necessarily have spy credentials, but I kind of know what a spy story is at this point. And I feel like even with those credentials, I still feel like I'm missing some key information here.
Well, I think, for you, I think this story it's a weird spy story in that we're seeing like the end of the story versus the beginning. Like, we're not seeing Philby where he's like doing all the spying. We're not seeing him spying. We're seeing the after effects of him being exposed. And so it's almost like, all those movies that you've watched, they ended, and then like a year or 2 later, they picked up again and showed what happened to these people after the end of the story. And so I think that maybe plays a little bit with some of that dissonance that you're talking about, where you're not quite sure where it's going and what it's trying to say. What I would say is, looking forward towards the next few episodes, I think we're going to see, more of the CIA kind of getting mixed in there. They've dropped a character, James Angleton, who is well known in, spy history as kind of a mole hunter, and a little bit crazy. So I think that'll be kind of interesting to see how they weave that in there to tell the story a little bit more.
Okay, so I think the final question as we bring it home, Jeff, I'll answer it first myself, but I think really listeners want to hear from you on this one as the expert. Would you check this out? I myself, I probably wouldn't reach for this initially. I'm intrigued now I've seen the first 2 episodes. I think they've sort of hooked me with the acting and the performances from the 2 leads, and I think some of the other characters. It's great seeing Adrian Edmondson on screens since it's part of my childhood. Anna Maxwell Martin, as I mentioned, I think she's fantastic. So I'm hooked to see the rest. I want to see where this story goes. But if people are checking this out for the first time, they haven't necessarily watched the first episode yet, and they're curious, they want to dip their toe in. Would you recommend picking up this show?
Yeah, well, first I want to say thank you, not only for having me on, but also referring to me for the first time as an expert. I'm writing that down in my diary right now. No, I think if you've read any of McIntyre's books that are steeped in kind of the Cold War, and especially this one, you're going to want to watch this. If you're somebody who, lives and dies on Alec Guinness and Tinker Tailor, I think you're going to want to watch this. If you're somebody who is less enamored with those types of stories, I think maybe you might want to do a pass on this. For me, I love that stuff, so I'm there for it. I'm definitely want to see the rest of this and see where they go and how they weave this story, because I feel like we've seen a lot of kind of what's going on already with these 2, and so I'm curious how they play it out for the rest of the episodes. That part I'm kind of scratching my head over, knowing kind of the backstory, and so I'm curious where they go.
Yeah, that's what's keeping me going, is sort of curious to see where it takes me, but without knowing necessarily, which you do have that sort of foresight on that one through reading the book. But yeah, the groups of people you mentioned are the people in my head I would have recommended this to as well. I'll be interested to see what people on, Spybrary think of it. The sort of those people who are well versed and steeped in that world think of this show. I hope they enjoy it. But yeah, other than that, I've had a blast talking to the gents. I was very happy to sort of pick their brains on making the show. I hope you all got a lot from that too. If you do check the show out, let us know what you think of it as it eventually over the few weeks unrolls and unravels. But Jeff Quest, I'll say your full name because it's so cool. Thank you for once again joining me on Spy Hards. I'm sorry Cam can't be here, but frankly, with his tiny shoes, we wouldn't have noticed anyway.
Well, thank you again for having me on. It was great to talk to both of them and to talk to you about the show and get a chance to see it.
It's been an absolute pleasure talking with you, Jeff. For those who aren't aware of you, obviously we'll have links in the show notes below, but where can people find more from you online?
Sure. spywrite.com. It's right with a W. You can find me there. I also host a podcast all about John le Carré's novels, so lecarrecast.com, or I also post on Mick Herron's Slow Horses series. So that's you can find all that online at Spywrite. I've got links to everything there.
Yeah, there'll be links down below. I mean, at one point in time, I think we were in a network together. I don't know how that went or where that went, but hey, we're Spy Bros, and that's the main thing. And you're part of the fold. You're part of the Spy Network, so it's great to have you. And I reach out for you whenever I have book stuff, so it's great to have you back on the show, Jeff. We should have to do another film soon. But thank you once again, Jeff.
Thanks so much.
There you go, folks. That was our chat of A Spy Among Friends. Let us know what you think of the show. And if you want to hear more interviews like this and sort of special episodes about TV launches, I do get a lot of invitations and I don't often take them because Spy TV is not something I really do that often. I don't feel like I have the right sort of pedigree to do it. Maybe that's wrong. Maybe that's not the case and you want to hear us do it more. Let me know. You can, of course, follow us discreetly on social media at SpyHards. That's SpyHards on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. But until next week, listeners, we'll see you among the shadows.